go live. Yeah.
I mean, we are live now.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
it's all
yeah,
good.
you just killed that one. Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Moving on.
Oh dear. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm so sorry that
Yeah,
for the
it's
second
all
week.
his fault. It's
For the
nothing to
second
do with
week in a
me.
row, we're late. First time it was his fault. This time it's my fault. We haven't had the chance.
First Freddie Starr dies, then Doris Day, and now this. What can I say?
Doris Day has died today, hasn't she? Or it's been announced today. It's such a shame. What a waste. I mean, I say that she lived a full life, but it's still sad to see her go. But yes, good evening, everyone. I'm joined, as always, as you can already tell, by the stalwart Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Well, stalwart is one way to describe me. Yes, I'm the one who puts attack hamster pictures up on Twitter. But
Have you been doing so of late?
Yes, yeah. The attack hamster battalion is doubling down on academic agents' claim that walls solve everything.
What did he claim? Walls?
Well, yes. How should we say they are completely impenetrable, and
Right.
they will commit to the fact that they will stop more than 0%. That's how far he is willing to go. You see, because I counted that walls can be scaled by ladders.
Yeah, they can indeed. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, the battle for Helm's Deep proved that.
Yes, if not anything else, yes. But I just love your choice.
I'm
it's
not
some historical event, but
no, of course
film
not.
I saw, yes.
The no, as I was saying off air, I was walking home, and I've just had a wonderful day. I've been out with friends and so on, and I've seen a clock tower, and I was actually heading towards a friend of mine's house, and I said, "That can't be the time." and so I asked a passerby. I said, "What's the time?" I said, "It's 10 to 8." And here I am, 40 minutes from home.
Well, so there
planning
you go.
on going to another friend's house, and I said, "I'm really sorry. I will see you on Thursday," and legged it for the tube. And lo and behold, I managed to make it and set everything up, and we're not too late. People asking, why did AA delete unpopular opinions? You monster! I am not the person who's responsible for him deleting unpopular opinions.
I don't think he deleted them. I think he
has
set them
privated them.
Yes.
And the theory is that he gave a more public speech. He will be effectively fully self-doxing soon. And so his plan is to private previous unpopular opinions, just in case they're too spicy and anyone goes through them. And he's going to make access to them a Patreon reward plus, and if you don't want to do that, then there may be a short paywall that you can use. I don't know what he's going to do, but that's what he suggested to me. So yeah, you'll have access to regular, normal, unpopular opinion shows. That's just fine. But I believe after 3 days, he's going to private them now. So there's that. People saying, "Oh, look, it's a Britisher stream," as if it's an NSO stream. Thank you very much. And the Britisher is kind enough to come along and have a chat with me, aren't you, sir? And he said, so they say, "Okay, look, it's a Britisher stream. Remember the rules. We drink every time Britisher says, 'if you know what I mean,' or mentions the Romans, and people complaining that there's not enough wine in the world for that." So there you go.
There is that, yes.
So yes, talking about...
Then, of course, I could mention the Romans, if you know what I mean.
Yes, you could. This is almost as bad. We used to have this game. So back on one of the really early streams, one of my mods for this channel, a chap called Dominic, very valued member of the Watch streamers. Basically, he had this game where he would drink every time the British or I said somewhat.
Yes, it was Dominic, wasn't it? Wasn't it a chap called Dominic who
That's
basically...
what I just said.
Oh, so sorry, I missed the Dominic bit in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember he committed himself to that, and I was beginning to suspect we might have killed him by the end of the stream.
Yeah, we got him wasted a couple of times, semi reasonably and semi planned, but no, apart from that. Dear, but no, it's great to be here though.
But yes, as I say, I have already reprimanded you before we came on air for interrupting Regina Bell, because this is just one of the things that is completely intolerable. I was just trading jazz links, so links to YouTube clips of memorable jazz numbers with Stephen W. Carson, or Radlib. And so I remembered Regina Bell having done that remarkable performance at the Apollo Theatre. So I sent him the link and then decided to listen to it myself. And I got 1 minute in, and who should suddenly turn up in the DMs and say, "Oh, yeah, I'm here. Here's the link."
The only thing,
swine.
The only thing I know Regina Bell from is Aladdin. And she sang A Whole New World.
Well, for those people who want to know, once this stream is over, you can check out Regina Bell singing Mr. Paganini. It's basically a Ella Fitzgerald classic. And she did it at the Apollo Theatre. There was a sort of famous concert that was held there. And she came on and she just blew it away. It was remarkable. And yes, being old enough to remember when that actually happened. It was one of those performances that just basically took everyone's breath away. But anyway, moving on.
It's quite all right. You can stay on the topic all evening if you'd like. Salty as you appear to be, I wouldn't want to poison the rest of the conversation. Is this Douglas Murray's channel? No, I wish it was. This would be entertaining. I'd also be disappointed if Douglas Murray had only, 6.2k subs.
Well, you're Douglas and I'm Murray. That's it.
Yes. Or is it the other way round? I can never remember. Good evening, Discordia. Good evening, Davey. And thank you for becoming a patron, Chris H. I appreciate that. That's something which will help keep us going. I've been doing a lot of statistics today, so I've not really had that much time to catch up with the news. The only story which seemed to jump out at me was this one about this poor. I say poor. It's this child, and if I put 3. Let me see where I can get here. The Daily Mail, yes. So basically, foster parents to gender transition their son, 7, and their foster son, 3, to female.
Oh, and both the son and the foster son, so people who are completely unrelated to each other, just coincidentally happen to both fall into that tiny group of people, percentage-wise, who would want to transition.
Indeed. Now, I am reading this off Breitbart, but I saw it earlier on in the Daily
Mail. Wondering whether there might be a kind of a factor that combines those two completely non-related cases.
Well, we shall see, won't we? As I say, I'm reading this from Breitbart, but I did read it on the Daily Mail. There appears to be a Telegraph piece as well. It's just the first one I clicked. So for those of you who will shout fake news at me for Breitbart, or the fact that they can be a bit aggressive, the two parents, named only as TP and CP, already have a 7-year-old biological child who changed their gender from boy to girl a few months earlier. Parents saying they supported their 7-year-old's transition, going as far as to change their legal status to that of a girl, ordering a new passport. When the 3-year-old turned 4 and was sent to school, he was sent in wearing a girl's uniform, despite the school expressly asking the parents to stop him doing so. And an investigation came after concerns arose that the parents were actively encouraging a gender swap and had manipulated their children. It was later found that a 3rd child fostered by the couple had experienced gender issues while staying with them. However, the judge ruling on the case claimed that the evidence from almost all sources of how the children are prospering in the care of CP and TP provides very powerful support to the contention that they are good parents. A supposed gender expert, Vicky Pastersky of Harley Street, insisted the children's gender dysphoria did not result from interpersonal influence or environmental interference. And
let me guess, it was something in the water.
Yes, clearly. Alex Jones has some super male vitality that he's been putting in the water, or super female vitality in this case. Mr. Justice Williams and Ms. Pasterski made compelling rebuts that made it overwhelmingly obvious that neither of the children had suffered or were at risk of suffering significant emotional harm from a complete social transition to females occurring at a very young age.
Yeah, we just wonder what the odds are of another foster child possibly.
You just it's like 3 kids, or 2 to 3 kids. It's not entirely clear, but it's just the idea that like a child at the age of 3 having any idea what a gender even is, compared to just like, are they even that potty trained at that point? Like they have no concept of these issues, and you just go, oh, for goodness sake. Like, how am I going to get attention from my parents? Is the biggest thing going through a child's mind at that age. Do you not agree? You agree? So
yeah, just about, yes. And of course, if you then, how shall we say, if you could just basically shower them with attention, you're effectively showering them in rewards. And of course, all that attention is then laudable and completely supportive, then yes, I mean, the child is basically just going to be trained to basically repeat that behavior in order to get more of it.
This is why neglectful parents, their kids act out, because neglectful parents typically shout at their children when they're upset with them, but they will, they won't praise them or do anything with them whilst they're being seen but not heard, shall we say, or not seen and not heard. So you get this idea that the child will act out so that they get their parents' attention, even if it's negative, because they want to feel like they exist and they're desperate for social needs. And now you get this idea that, like, let's even say, let's be charitable, right? Let's say the 7-year-old actually has quite serious dysphoria. They want to transition, etc., etc. These parents are clearly lavishing attention upon the 7-year-old, right? They're so positive, they're so supportive, they're so understanding,
and they're constantly reinforcing to the child that child is special.
Yep, and that's an important thing. And then the younger kids are seeing that and going, "Oh, he gets so much more love than we do. We should, we can emulate that, and we get that, even if it's subconscious. I mean, it's clear. It's very clear. I don't know why chat has suddenly decided that they'll go off on one and decide whether or not V is actually a woman." And ask.
No, I'm quite sure Alexander the meerkat is male.
Yes, indeed.
But I do love him. I do love his expression. I even used it in this week's, the week that was, the stronk woman. It just, that cracks me up every time. I'm chuckling now, just thinking, it's just, he's, how people sort of use all sorts of things, the Warmans and whatever, when they're talking about feminists basically constantly going on about women this, women that. But the stronk woman is just perfection. So yeah, I've got the feeling this is terminology with which I am going to stick. I just can't help myself. The stronk woman I just find wonderful.
Do you want to add a continuing endorsement of V? Perhaps ask him to come on your channel? I mean, no, I quite like...
well, I just know that sort of the 1 or 2 times I've actually been on a stream with V, and I just always couldn't help myself and made some sort of reference to Alexander the meerkat, which always drew sort of the live stream equivalent of a blank look.
Yes,
what the hell are you talking about?
You keep trying to keep this moniker, this description, this comparison alive, and no one else wants to take it up.
But it's just, I am sorry, he is Alexander the meerkat. There is no way you can get away from that. Sorry, in my mind, he is Alexander the meerkat.
Perhaps we should petition
and
him.
He wants to share to sell his car insurance. Yes. Anyway, sorry. I'm having a moment.
I always viewed V as more of a Sheila's Wheels kind of guy when it came to selling car insurance. And if any of you aren't from Britain, you will have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. But
yeah, that is it, as long as he's not WeBuyAnyCar.com, because someone should have been shot for 1 or 2 of those adverts.
grief. The no, so we were also discussing kind of in the vein of last week's Fake Accents Unite. I was talking with my friends about music. We'd wandered into a music shop, and people were quite distressed by my ignorance on traditional things. So someone picked up a book filled with lyrics and stuff like that, and going, "Is it not immediately obvious who this band is? Is it not immediately obvious who this band is?" And I'm just going, I'm really sorry, but no, I have absolutely no idea. It turned out it was Pink Floyd.
So basically, the bullying in terms of the music genre that has been begun by AA is now being continued into your real life experiences. Is that what you're saying?
Every day, I'm intending on going to the Deep Law live meetup, which is happening in a week's time on the 20th.
With a machete, and we will be hearing about it in the future.
It's so difficult with a machete. You haven't got really the reach. I need a semi-automatic, to be honest.
Well, I don't know. The people of Rwanda seem to have managed without any problems. Sorry, I'm sorry. This is taking a dark turn, isn't it? We've gone from Alexander the Meerkat to the Rwandan Holocaust in the space of 2 minutes. Yes.
What Holocaust? I don't know. No genocide happened there.
Yeah. It's remarkable, isn't it? When you think of that sort of thing, because I mean, what people sort of say about the Holocaust in Germany is that what is so chilling is the kind of the sort of bureaucratic, industrialized effort at exterminating people. But that's just it. It was to a certain extent industrialized, whereas in Rwanda it was manual, and that is so staggering. As in, you just sort of ask yourself about the actual logistics of that much killing, if you know what I mean. When it's just a matter of clubbing people to death or hacking them up with machetes, if you're having to do it by the hundreds of thousands, it becomes a rather arduous task.
There's only so much strength in one arm, really. No matter how hard you train.
It is one of those things that you sort of think, well, hang on a moment, there must have been quite a few people that pretty much lost their minds. And I don't just mean in terms of, oh, well, they were acting in an irrational manner, if you know what I mean, but that they just simply flipped, because I just don't understand how you would be able to otherwise kill that many people.
I think there's something to be said for like the way in which we otherize people, or which people otherize people, rather. So I think it's entirely possible. Like you see, even like some of the more extreme lefty types, right? Because I'm just drawing from the left because it's the ones I've seen most recently. The idea, like John McDonnell, right, is saying that like Tories should be harassed and unable to leave their homes. You see some people like never kiss a Tory and that sort of thing in this country, right? Like, and these seem, I mean, people are free to do what they want in that regard, but I do not think it's that much of a jump if they actually get into power and you get enough like enough hatred.
I know what you mean with the otherizing, but I mean, I remember sort of, reading things that Himmler kind of said to the SS.
Sure.
In which he, how shall we say, it kind of, it's a sort of a strange thing, because we always like to think of the SS as just these kind of ruthless Nazi killers, if you know what I mean. Whereas in some of his messages, he was kind of addressing the SS, in which he kind of acknowledged, I know what you're doing is hard. This is very difficult for you to do, but you're doing it for a greater cause.
Yes.
And your suffering will be recognized in history. So, but what I mean is, when he was sort of addressing them in that way, it kind of showed that it was being sold to them as a kind of suffering. That basically, there was no way of sugarcoating it, even to the most fanaticized people.
Well, no,
that
mass.
essentially you are doing something completely unnatural and is running against all your instincts, if you know what I mean.
I think
So with all the othering in the world, this is still something incredibly hard to do.
yeah,
And it took real organization and effort and constant propaganda and constant psychological trickery to keep them at it.
to quote Hot Fuzz, the greater good.
The greater good. Yeah.
And basically, I was actually looking at and reading a biography of Ant. I can't remember his surname. The basically the ex SAS chap, or ex SBS chap, sorry, who ran the Channel 4 kind of reality TV challenge series SAS Who Dares Wins, and he was having a chat with, I think it was Skavlan, you know, the Swedish. It's a big Swedish channel, and they were talking about. He was talking. They were talking about. You know, like, was it difficult? At one point, they were talking about mostly normal things, and then they just said, you know, was it difficult? Because he was talking about kicking in doors every night and killing a lot of people, and he was just like, he suddenly switches. It's like a switch goes off in his head, and he just goes, nope. And I don't talk about how many people I killed. I don't think about how many people I killed, but I know that the people that I did kill, I killed for the greater purpose of the success of the campaign and to protect people at home. And they're like, well, didn't you think that some of them might have been, you know, like inexperienced kids just drawn into the fight, who didn't really know what they were doing or were brainwashed? And he goes, yes, but it doesn't matter. And there's like a certain amount of that you can do if you give a grand narrative, especially, like, I imagine it was quite difficult, or it may have been quite difficult to motivate the SS in the beginning, but I think as soon as you start seeing pushback and then you've already sold your national mission as kind of the continuation, the survival of the German people, the supremacy of the German people, the kind of the push forward to a new world order. I think that certainly contextualized with the Allies' efforts to repel the Germans was certainly something to keep motivated.
You know, we all know that it was possible, and we all know they actually did it. You know, but what I was just sort of trying to touch at was that somewhere inside the human being there is a great deal of pain going on while those actions are taking place.
Well,
No matter how no matter how much one rationalizes it, you know, on the outside.
Well, let me put it this way, and I say that as someone who, let me put it this way. So certainly from this perspective, I have friends who've had to kill people. Thankfully, I've only had to do it once, but let's not get into that. But the like, it makes you sick physically. Like, even if you know exactly what you're doing at the time that you're doing it, it makes you feel ill, to the point where it's something which goes away with time, I'm told. But it's like, it's an act which defies the essence of being, because you know what you've taken from someone. So you know that you've taken a life. You know that you know, if you don't think too hard about it, you can't think too hard about it. So you like, but people are very violently sick, even if they haven't killed someone, but they think they've killed someone. But it's also different if it's a close quarters encounter as compared to shooting, because you tend to get people tend to get nauseous when they've shot someone, or they think they've shot someone. But if it's a close quarters encounter, they tend to be quite violently ill for about 24 hours. And then you just fill them full of fluids and tell them to get over it effectively at the time. You know,
yeah, I mean, I remember having, you know, you know what the internet is like. Everyone is always terribly brave on the internet. And I remember having a conversation once, and dare I point out, the counterparts were Americans. And it was, you know, somehow the subject came up at the Falklands and whatever, and how the in certain areas of the Falklands, that the war just descended into complete chaos. And there was that famous ridge, wasn't there, where the Brits run out of ammunition.
Mm.
And eventually just decided, okay, look, we're running out of ammo. There is no way this is going to continue this way. So they ordered a bayonet charge, and they won that way. And I was sort of saying, well, that takes a certain, certain type of bravery, and
Well,
it it's
this is why you get the concept of battlefield courage, right? So courage being distinct from bravery, in that courage requires fear first.
yes,
So you are courageous if you overcome your fear to achieve an act of bravery, whereas you can be brave but stupid, whereas you
okay,
can't be
yes,
courageous
yeah,
but stupid.
I completely accept that, yes. But the reason I bring this up is because, of course, that my interlocutors at the time were absolutely, convinced that, oh, no, killing a person is just the same. Either way, it's the same thing, just shooting. And they always kept on telling me how they had been to shooting ranges and this, that, whatever. And I just said, look, I think it's going to be a difference of coming to close quarters with a person and killing them physically in that way, rather than shooting them from 100 yards away.
I think the only soldiers, like, there's a funny thing. There's like so my friends in the infantry, when I get shot at for the first time, typically, I mean, this was Iraq and Afghanistan, mixture of campaigns, and it's one of those things where they get shot at, and it's kind of exhilarating because, like, especially if no one gets hit, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of those, I can't believe people shot at us.
Yeah,
Typically,
it's
they
kind
get
of
asked.
roller coaster
Yeah,
situation. Yes.
typically people get asked to return fire. So they'll put down a little bit of covering fire. You don't really know who you're shooting at. You typically can't see the aggressor, and it's kind of bizarre. It's kind of like this surreal thing that's happened,
Hmm.
and then at some point someone will get hit.
Yeah.
I mean, typically they don't die because equipment's pretty good nowadays. But some pretty nasty stuff can happen. A friend of mine was in a pillbox, and they had Taliban snipers which came down, actually trained guys they've been dealing with, effectively civilians who'd just been handed an AK and told to go out and shoot at the British
Yeah.
and the Americans, and make a bit of a scene just to test our responses. And we didn't waste any ammunition on them because you can tell, because they're shaking, they're terrified, and they typically shoot in the air because they're scared that if they hit one of us, that will kill
Yes.
them.
Yes.
Whereas the Taliban snipers would come out, take up 4 or 5 positions, we wouldn't really know where they are. And this one guy got a lucky shot into the pillbox, and had a nice ricochet around and minced the person in there, unfortunately. But something like that happens, and that changes things, because it changes the whole mood, because you realize that this is not a game
Yeah.
anymore.
The surreality has suddenly left.
Yeah,
It's no longer this kind of unreal situation whereby bullets are flying overhead and you're returning fire. But as you say, it's surreal insofar as that this is not the way life is. So it's what you've got is just an adrenaline ride, but that is as long as nobody gets hurt.
yeah, and like it's different as well. So either that happens, or you come into a situation where, as you say, you are faced with the aftermath of your own squad's actions. And again, I am not speaking from personal experience on this one. It's just what friends have told me. So take that as you will. But it becomes quite surreal, because you are suddenly faced with what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, it is a statistical reality that most people who develop PTSD, for instance, are people who are horrified by the actions that they've taken at their own hands, rather than what's happened to them. Because most people, even people who lose a limb, typically can accept if it's in the line of duty, just because of the mindset and stuff like that. Like, it's not to say they don't suffer from mild forms, but the most severe stuff, is typically because, let's say, they've been going somewhere with a squad, they get jumped, and they are forced to basically overpower an individual and then murder them. It's a very difficult place to be in, and people can be horrified and have nightmares about the fact that they're doing that. Yeah.
There's a very interesting statistic that I heard once. It was a program. It might have been on the BBC. I'm not sure anymore. It was about the way that modern training of soldiers changed in the decades after the Second World War.
Sure.
And it was because one actually did quite detailed studies, both with German veterans and Allied veterans, to kind of try to establish how effective they actually all were. Because obviously this was a war that had gone on for years, and very large numbers had been taking part. So as far as statistics are concerned, this was actually a very good source, if you know what I mean. And to their horror, the parties involved worked out that actually only about 20% of all the men present had ever shot in anger.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason simply was that it's precisely that. It's against human instincts. For all the stories of daring do and whatever that we always hear, that or all these kind of horror stories of human aggression and this, that, whatever, serial killers and whatnot, the human being is actually a fairly peaceable animal. And therefore, if you just basically stick them in uniforms, give them a gun, and say, "Okay, go," the people on the other side shoot them.
Yes.
Given that that all of them are independent agents, they will have a think about it themselves.
And conscripts aren't great soldiers.
And it was particularly what they worked out. It was particularly the kind of the training of sniping. That basically you would have your carbine rifle. There would only be a few shots in there, possibly even just one, depending on what model you had. And you would basically trained to kind of use every single shot to the maximum, as in kind of aim well, take a good look at your opponent.
I mean, especially if you were Russian,
Yeah,
and you were given your 10 rounds of ammunition
yes,
and told to pick up the rifle from the man in front of you when he fell over and had to sleep. Yeah.
But the problem thereby being that your conscript soldier, who isn't really a natural born killer, if you know what I mean, is lying there on his belly. He's now got the German in the crosshairs, and now he's got more than enough time to personalize his enemy, to have a good think. Do I really want to kill this son, this brother, this father of somebody else? Do you understand what I mean? And therefore, most of them never actually did it.
It's funny that you should mention that. I think I read something similar, but that also stated that if you had a sniper who had to fire into a group of people, then it was much easier mentally.
So you kind of anonymize them. Yes.
Yeah, because
I could well imagine that. Yes.
But also, you have to remember, you have to look at, especially for the World Wars. I mean, you look at all the banter that, all the nicknames which military forces have typically given enemy forces over the years, and it's all as much as it's an exercise in coping and in joking, it's also an exercise in dehumanization. Because you're not calling, you're not even calling them German. You're calling them Kraut or whatever.
Yes, but then there was also the Germans also referring to the English as Tommies, and the Germans referring to the Brits referring to the Germans as Jerrys. You felt at times they almost personalized them.
Well, that was if you call them all Tommies and you call them all Jerrys, then you can rationalize it as 1 in a million.
I know what you mean, but what I mean is they're not referring to them as swine droppings or something like that.
No, but it's more subtle. It's got to be more subtle than that. I'm reminded of two things. So first of all, chat's already brought up, which is we've got skulls on our caps. Are we the bad guys?
Are we the bad guys?
And secondly, I'm reminded of The Men That Stare at Goats, if you know it.
Yes, I am familiar with that film.
it was a book first by a chap called John Ronson.
Yes.
But the scene, let me see what it is.
It's the Bible of remote viewing and so on, isn't it? If I remember rightly. Yeah, but it's interesting that the "Are we the bad guys with skull on our caps" comes up. Because, of course, Messrs. Mitchell and Webb, or should I just say, Mr. Webb has been in the news recently, hasn't he?
Oh yes, I mean, to be fair, the last time he reared his head, I mean, I always view him as the kind of the talentless, the talentless half of Mitchell
Well,
and
he's
Webb.
not the star of the two.
He is
I
not,
mean, let's be polite. I mean,
and
it's very easy to sort of snipe at folk like that who are on
anyway,
television.
he
One
wrote.
never really knows what the contribution is, if you know what I mean.
So he wrote a book called How to Be a Boy.
Okay.
Which
That
was
sounds ominous.
It is. Which was all about his. I think it was partially autobiographical, and he was talking about how like he doesn't fit any of the traditional masculine stereotypes, and that he suffered terribly as a he was bullied, and this is why he needs feminism and why he considers himself a male feminist. And so I knew that something would come up with him sooner or later, especially with regards to free speech in comedy and so on and so forth.
I can see what you mean there.
Oh, it was. I've been told by Sarah it was how not to be a boy. Okay, yes.
Yeah. No, but what just struck me about that story was basically that immediately, but precisely what I just said about him. That basically, I find it unfair of people to sort of say, "Oh, well, he's the talentless one" and whatever, because it's a bit like saying the Eurythmics, Dave Stewart, he's the talentless one because everybody just knows Annie Lennox. Yeah, but he's the one that writes everything. Do you understand what I mean? So when you look at something like Mitchell and Webb, you have absolutely no idea how the tasks are divided between the two of them. So it's very it's very easy to just basically point at the one who is the lesser known one and say, oh well, he's the one that contributes nothing.
I know, I know.
But in that same way, he used that very same cheap attack, if you know what I mean, of basically, oh well, it was just shit. The stuff this chap contributed and whatever. Which of course we have no way of knowing what it would have been. So it's a sort of very, very cheap way of attacking somebody. But what I just found so remarkable was, when it turned out it was actually Random McCann, and Dr. Random McCann had actually been asked to provide scripts. And you just sort of think, well, how on earth would you, given that he's trying to give the impression that, oh well, these people on YouTube and whatever, what do we know about them anyway? They're just all rubbish. How would you know sufficiently well that Dr. Random McCann and Sargon of Akkad are in a similar enough sphere that you could confuse them with each other?
I tell you what, British hat, assume that I know nothing about what Robert Webb has been talking about over the last couple of days, and just qualify what comment you're talking about specifically, because I'm aware he's been around, but I'm not familiar with the specifics.
Are you not familiar with the specifics of this? Well, he basically tweeted his condolences to Jess Phillips, and then basically said, well, it won't come as a surprise to you that this chap, Sargon of Akkad, had supplied scripts for our comedy show on spec, so for free, in the hope of basically getting a foot into the comedy scene or whatever. And of course, they were absolute shit. Which comes as no surprise. Which will come as no surprise because UKIP and YouTube are where the talentless go once it becomes clear that the normal people aren't interested in them. That was, I mean, I'm not exactly quoting, I'm paraphrasing here. That was pretty much the content of the tweet.
He has released a follow-up statement saying, recently I claimed Carl Benjamin had sketches rejected by that M&W sound. That turned out to be wrong. I got it mixed up with another YouTube fat-faced anti-feminist jizzlord.
Well, there you go.
Apologies. This is a more accurate portrayal of Carl in his own word.
Yes, but this is just it. My question is, now remember, these are all just completely talentless, fat-faced jizzlords, okay? So how does one know that these two particular personas are in a similar field so that one can actually confuse them with each other? Do you understand what I mean?
I tell you what, I'll share my screen and I'll let the comments speak for us.
Because I just look at this and I just go, hang on, this something here is strange. Because let's face it, it's sufficiently long ago that he wouldn't remember that the person had been asked. But at the same time, he can still remember, even though he's misremembering, but he can still remember that Sargon of Akkad submitted some comedy.
Of course he can.
I just can't believe that one would actually remember who submitted something 7 years ago if it's a person one isn't really dealing with.
Yeah, wasn't worthy of any note or anything.
It's not someone in one's circle. It's not someone, and now suddenly he remembers, and you just sort of think, well, how does one confuse those two with each other? And that's where I am just deeply suspicious. This was actually an attempt at a hit piece which went completely wrong. Because something here makes no sense whatsoever. I confused Sargon of Akkad with Dr. Randomakam. That's a for somebody who says that these people are all complete trash and not worth one's time. How would one know these two people sufficiently well to even be able to confuse them with each other? It makes no sense.
We know he's secretly a Randomakam addict.
So either he's constantly watching, this sort of material online, or there is something deeper going on whereby one thought one had something and one could launch it and then it would make its way into the newspapers and so on and so on, but one got one's facts somehow wrong because it's all a long time ago.
Oh dear,
Yeah, I mean, this whole Sargon thing, I mean, for heaven's sake, we're now not even throwing milkshakes at him, but even horse manure is being thrown. Oh, and fish at another occasion. and you just go, it's not. I remember sort of 20 years ago, there were sort of people like the Custard Pie Gang and whatever.
Yeah.
And it was sort of, it was in the spirit of irreverence. And it was particularly targeted against the powerful. Whereas now that whole thing has changed. So this idea that, it's only a milkshake, not really. It is the spirit in which it is being used.
It's still assault for the sake of everything else,
It's nasty, and that's where something has changed, and that's why I see these things different. That's why I see these things differently than I did 20 years ago when someone might have pushed a custard pie in Bill Gates's face.
But it's also dishonest at the moment. You get in the same way. You remember a few years back we had Smugly Puff, right? Lying to the police, going, "Didn't see him touch you. It didn't see anyone touch him. Obviously, he didn't touch him." And then you've also got, and this time it's like, my hand slipped and the milkshake ended up on him, and it's just like, oh, for goodness sake. Although I do find it mildly amusing that they've decided that he's going to carry around a milk-shaped cup or a something which looks like a milkshake cup to drink his drinks out of before before new tours. In the morning before they get going, he's having a milkshake just because people are photographing him doing it for amusement. I'll tell you what, I'm going to run through the 2 super chats we've got, and then we'll move on, because do you know what? I'm kind of sick of talking about Sargon. as much as I love him to pieces, he he's dominated the channel and so on. Good news, by the way,
so
everyone.
Obviously, this is going to be the title of the live stream, isn't it? Now,
The Sargon of Akkad
I'm sick of Sargon. That is going.
Can you imagine? Imagine that, like 10,000 views on the stream. Who knows? Easiest 10K I've ever made. But the Silly Sailor has said, we're saying the German work ethic is overstated. Is that what you're saying, Britisher? Is that what you have been saying?
Is this in reference to?
This is in reference to a certain 6 million figure.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes. Moving on.
NSA Drone 144 has donated 10 Aussie dollars and says, absolutely love your content. So here, have my super chat. Virginity, I wish I could catch more of your stuff live. Please get the Britisher to say, oh, whoa.
Oh, whoa. I'm just wondering, if he is paying you in $50 notes.
What, under the table?
Yes, yeah.
Why?
Because there was this wonderful little story about they changed their $50 note. I don't know if it was so that they could have a woman on it, but it's just wonderful that it circulated for several weeks until some eagle-eyed person kind of looked at it and went, hang on a moment, something wrong here. And it turned out that sort of, in the sort of small print on the note, that had a typo. So they'd spelled It spelled responsibility as responsibility.
Oh dear.
And you just sort of, well, yeah, it can happen to anyone, but it is kind of funny that it should happen on something as official as a banknote. And then the banknote circulates for weeks until finally someone realizes.
Reads it. Yes, it shows you how much. People in chat are saying that I was referencing Trigglypuff. No. Trigglypuff was no more hate speech on this campus, wasn't she? Where yes.
Smuglypuff got her name because she was extremely smug. Yes.
In fact, I will pull up an image. I tell you what, I love that it auto completes on Google still.
Clearly, Smuglypuff was a spiel on Trigglypuff, because Smuglypuff appeared not too much later.
No. Here we go. This is Smuglypuff. For those of you, this is the face it made when telling a police officer that they hadn't seen an assault and lying flatly to the face. So yeah, that was that one. Oh, the joy. Was it Jordan Peterson? Oh, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Right. What were we talking about?
I don't remember it involving Jordan Peterson. I think it was Lauren Southern, wasn't it?
I don't know. I don't know what it was at the time. All I know is it was protesting someone, be it Lauren, be it Milo, be it anyone. So there we go. Halsey News Network, shill my book. If you send me a link in Discord, man, and I'll put it in there towards the end. NSA Drone 144 again, 5 Aussie dollars said they initially tried to pass off the typo as a security feature.
Oh, of course. Yes, of course.
It was clearly,
or of course, a new Australian spelling.
I do. It's just the way everyone says it, isn't it? Responsibility. It's like responsible tongue. I remember actually watching a documentary.
Well, for the nation that uses sandpaper at cricket.
Only you will get that, British. I remember watching a documentary by Banksy. It's the only one he ever did. It's called Exit Through the Gift Shop, and it's really well done if you're interested in the kind of street art scene as it was back in the kind of 90s, early noughties. And basically it he was talking about the fact that he tried to come up with this idea. He tried to come up with an art piece, and he wanted to forge a load of money and throw it all out. So sort of along the lines of kind of like fat cats or something like that. So he did up like a caricatured version of the Queen's face and stuff like that, and wrote a load of, shall we call it, inglorious text all over it, sort of irreverent. And they did an initial test run where they printed £500,000 using forged stolen plates, and they had it. He has it in a box, but they took, I think, 10 grand of it and did like a mini showing, because they wanted to take it initially to the top of a London skyscraper and throw it off of there. But they decided they'd do a smaller test run at some carnival or something. And he did it there, and then they realised that actually, if they'd done too good of a job, and if you took these £10 notes, these fake £10 notes, and you scrumpled them up enough, because they're obviously crisp at time of print, but if you scrumpled them up and you just handed them to someone, really, you couldn't tell the difference between that and a thing if you just had a quick glance. And so, as they didn't want to get done for like a severe amount of fraud by the British government. Did I say scrumpled? It's like clearly a mixture between scrunched and crumpled.
Crumpled, yes. Yeah.
No, so if they scrunched them up, they look like £10 notes. So he didn't want to get done for.
If the Australian government can get away with responsibility, you can get away with scrumpled. No worries.
Yes, but as he didn't want to get done with counterfeiting, which is the word I'm looking for. Thank you, a fuzzy creature. He's basically just got this huge amount of forged cash sitting in boxes in the back of his garage.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned forgeries, because there is a fantastic forger story.
Go on.
I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. I had to look him up on Google because I didn't remember his name. I'm not sure. I mean, if there are any Dutch people out there, I'm not sure how he's pronounced. Whether it's Han van Meegeren or Han van Meegeren, but somebody may be able to get me right here. But it's a fantastic story. So this chap is generally regarded as the greatest forger who ever lived. So he was able to paint some of the Dutch masters, like Vermeers and whatever. But he would not copy a Vermeer. So he would not just make a copy of an existing painting and then sell that, because then there's two, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So this chap was good enough to be able to paint in the style of Vermeer. And, you know, when it comes to painters like that, so back in the 17th century or whatever, they would paint in their studio. And therefore, in their paintings, it's the same room over and over again, perhaps with the furniture rearranged and whatever. So if you're a proper connoisseur, and remember, you know, in this day and age, it's easy. You just Google Vermeer and all the paintings come up. Back then, a little bit more difficult, you know. But if you're a proper connoisseur and you know what the studio looked like, which chair it might have been, what mirror, but you know that he kind of repositioned them and whatever every time he made another painting. So you do the same thing. So you're painting in the style of, it looks like Vermeer Studio, it looks as though it's painted by Vermeer, and so on. And you pull off a completely new painting like that. He did that over and over again. And he even baked his paintings at a very low heat in order to get the crackulature. You know, those tiny little cracks.
Yes, the aging effect.
Age-old paint has got. And his mastery was such that just nobody could tell. And what happened then is along comes the Second World War, and this guy takes the Nazis for a ride. You know how Goering and whatever, they fancied themselves as art collectors and looted the museums around and Goering was just taken for a complete fool by this guy, who just basically sold him Dutch masters that didn't exist. and I think in his case, he kind of set himself up as some kind of art dealer. So he kind of got the Nazis to give him paintings in exchange for his, if you know
So
what I
he
mean.
got legitimate works in exchange for the forgeries.
And of course, at the end of the war, now you have to sort of, fast forward. Now comes the end of the war. So now comes the reckoning. So now, where are all those bloody Nazi collaborators? Where is Han Vermeegeren?
Yeah.
Where is he? Where is the bastard who sold our national heritage to the Nazis? That collaborator. So he ends up in court, and I mean, you would sort of think, art, selling art to the wrong type of people and whatever. But you have to, you may be found guilty, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Well, this is right after the war. Remember what the Brits did with Lord Haw-Haw?
It didn't go well.
It didn't go well, and he was in Lord Haw-Haw territory. They were baying for blood. So he had to do the one thing that, of course, no forger wants to do.
He had to admit the truth.
Admit, folks, you do realize that these paintings weren't real. I can produce any forgery. And of course, that's when the truth came out. So here was the one forger who was so good that he was never discovered.
Yeah, no one could catch him.
He admitted it himself due to conditions that had nothing to do with somebody finding out about him. So the wonderful bit about this is I remember in some program once, there was somebody who had an old painting, and it was basically some Italianate painting, so something that looks as if it was somewhere from round about the Renaissance, and they wondered whether this was of the master, and the scholar who looked at it for them said, no, this won't have been the master, but it could be of the school of the master. So this could be a painting which is, 400-500 years old, and it would have been painted by one of the pupils of the master. And of course, the pupils would then paint in the style they had learned from the master. So it's a similar style, which is why sometimes these things can be confused. But he said, no, this would be a pupil. This wouldn't be the master himself. With it being obviously 500 years old, this and of this school, this definitely has a value. So you're talking perhaps the low tens of thousands, 10, 20,000, something like that. And then he said, but there is another possibility. It could be Van Meegeren. And he said, the thing is that you would think if it's a forger, it would be worth less.
But because it's him,
the most famous forger in the world, his artworks by now actually have a value of their own, because it is understood that there is nobody that was ever so talented that he could effectively do a Dutch master, an Italian Renaissance. As I say, he's good enough, and also not. He's also smart enough to realize you can't copy a painting by an Italian master and then expect everybody to just believe, oh well, it must be real then, because everybody's thinking, well, where has this thing been for the last 500 years? So therefore, you produce something that looks as though it's produced by a pupil. So it's still worth a small fortune. It's just not worth a massive fortune. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's how this forger
everyone take a drink.
But the thing is, they were saying, well, actually, in today's markets, if it's him, it might be worth 100,000 or more.
Yeah.
So it's actually, if it's some unknown piece of art or whatever, from the school of or whatever, if it turns out to be him, it's actually worth more than if it's the original. And I find that wonderful. Why nobody in Hollywood has yet made why they're bloody busy making films about superheroes when they could make stories like this, because this begs to be told. The man who took the Nazis for a ride.
It could be done well, couldn't it?
That is just, it's just too good. It's brilliant.
I'd love for you to like effectively using the millions that you made being this forger, Britisher, to fund this film yourself. And then, and then to be the only have you seen the Shia LaBeouf musical?
But no, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the Shia LaBeouf musical.
There's a musical. It's a comedy sketch. And basically, it's this song about basically narrated as if you are the main character. With all this wonderful ballet and everything in the background and props and so on, about you being chased through the woods by Shia LaBeouf and eventually having to kill him to survive.
Okay,
and
yes,
like it's very silly.
Is this because I'm trying to get to his flag?
I don't know. And at
you're not familiar with that, with the flag?
No, afraid not. But at the end of this thing, there's just like some applause that starts slowly and starts rising from the audience, but it's one man, and it's just Shia LaBeouf sitting there alone in this massive theatre, applauding his own musical, effectively.
But don't you remember he put up a flag? He will not divide us.
Oh yes. I remember.
And then was it the 4chan lot that managed to locate it? Yes.
Have you been watching Internet Historian? Any chance?
No.
He's
just if I can just finish the Van Meegeren thing, because there's a twist to that. You have to imagine the man went to court, obviously the most hated collaborator in all Holland.
Right, yes.
When he then confessed that he had actually forged it, he went from hated collaborator within the space of 24 hours to national hero.
Yes, for having reclaimed all this artwork from the Nazis.
He is still celebrated in Holland today as the man who hoodwinked the Nazis.
Amazing. I love that his motivations were probably purely profit as well, which is also that. Anyway, speaking of Vermeer's paintings, I was recently watching. What was it called? It's called. I was looking at Penn and Teller, the magicians from Las Vegas, because they're actually quite strong anti-censorship, free speech activists.
Small chap ever spoken yet?
Yes, he does. And his voice sounds like a radio voice and absolutely does not fit his face. It's hilarious. Let me see what the film is called. There's Tim's Vermeer, right, which is a film about basically a friend of Penn and Teller decided that he wanted to paint a Vermeer, and he was convinced that Vermeer may have used different optical effects in order to create his paintings, as in technological assistance, different lenses, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wanted to see whether or not he could produce a Vermeer himself using said techniques to do it. And they started the film and they had absolutely no idea whether or not they were going to be able to pull it off and how long it would take, but they agreed to do it. And I think it took a little over a year for him to complete it. No, it took longer than that. I think it was it took a much longer period of time.
When you say with the lenses and whatever, I mean, are we just basically talking the is it called camera obscura?
So if
the small little hole and the painter sits in the darkened room, is that what they're talking about? Basically, you get the inverted image on the canvas.
I'm just having a look. See,
or are we actually talking sort of, some strange optical effects in order to, I don't know, sort of bend things or whatever?
Basically, right. So Tim Jennison is an inventor who became a successful founder of a company. He was an engineer and art enthusiast, became fascinated with the paintings of Johannes Vermeer. because his paintings have often been cited to have a photographic quality to them.
Mhm.
Spurred on by the book Secret Knowledge by British artist David Hockney and Vermeer's Camera by an architecture professor, Philip Stedman, he theorized that he used the camera obscura to guide his painting technique. Its initial idea that he used a simple light projection to paint is discarded. Anyway, that's going on through the synopsis. But basically, he observes a variety of oddities in Vermeer's work over the time of painting it, and attributing an idea to a theory that he had mechanical help and so on. The idea of diffuse lighting in order to recreate this idea. I think the film itself was a colossal flop, but it was directed by Penn and Teller. It was directed by Teller and advised by Penn. And
So it's all their fault. Yeah.
Yeah, clearly. But for them, they were creating a film for their friend, who was, for his sake, fortunately very wealthy and could produce it. And they were like, the idea is that the painting that he produces by the end is more a document of his journey into creating the painting as opposed to anything else. Apparently, it's quite positive, been quite positively received. But if you lay out the premise of the film to a mass audience, not that many people want to see a film about a man painting a painting.
Yeah, something tells me that The Girl with the Pearl Earring did better than their attempt at Vermeer.
Than Tim's Vermeer, yes.
Yeah, I think having Colin Firth and Scarlett Johansson may have advantages when it comes to doing Vermeer that way. Yes.
But I was just it fascinates me, like the idea of painting as someone who considers themselves to be how should we call it, artistically deficient or artistically challenged. That's one there. There's a reason I outsource any and all channel artwork. Speaking of which,
we're both very much in the same boat there. I think everyone has got sort of certain basic abilities and whatever, but I remember already at primary school, there was a chap in our class who could just draw like nothing else. And it wasn't that he had autistic parents, that he had been taught otherwise. There just seemed to be an innate ability. It's the ability somehow to observe and then transfer that observation. And as you know, as I went through primary school with him, he just got better and better. Where he went afterwards, who knows? But it was one of those things where you just sort of realize that yes, that's the difference between the talented and the also-rans. And I think everybody knew. We had a teacher who liked to kind of do little competitions in which he would offer little prizes and things like that. And therefore, particularly when it came to art classes and whatever, he found that was a good way of motivating folks, because otherwise nobody cared. And the guy who would win every time would be that chap, just simply because, it didn't matter what the challenge was. He could just produce anything. And when you can do that at 10 years old, you kind of realize,
someone's on a different level.
Someone's just on a different level, and it's as I say, it wasn't training. There wasn't anything in his home background, from what I know of. It just simply was him, and I think in a strange way, that chap was the one who gave me the sort of later appreciation of art, if you know what I mean. Because you kind of realize, yes, it takes something special. It takes a spark to be able to do these things. And the more extraordinary the person is, the more extraordinary that spark is, the more fantastical the results then become.
So what you're saying, Britisher, is you went to a primary school. I tell you, the more you tell me about your past, the more questions I have.
Oh, well, back in the Neolithic age when we had primary school.
When you set up the first primary school in order to be taught.
In order to have myself tutored. Yes.
Let me see. Harry Channel has sent a message for you, Britisher, for $5. Thank you very much. Always appreciated. And says, Britisher, have you heard Stolen Moments by the Oliver Nelson Quintet? If not, please do. It's essential listening if you love jazz.
The simple answer is I have not. I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'm entering Stolen Moments into the. Oh yes, here we are. Oliver Nelson Stolen Moments.
You've just done exactly what I did, which is read Oliver as Oliver
on my second screen on YouTube. So I will be able to play it once we're finished here.
Marvelous.
So I've got it here. Yes.
And whilst we're on the subject of painting, just before we move on, I am looking for a piece of artwork to replace my channel header. As you may have noticed, it's this great big purple plain thing with my old avatar on it and some rather basic text. So if you want to have your artwork featured on my channel, then please do create and submit, whether to me on Discord, on Twitter, or through some other means. Submit some ideas or pieces for that. If I look at the best ones, and if it's sufficiently good quality, I'm more than happy to compensate someone for producing that particular header. So there we go. What was he talking about? Jazz. That was the thing. I haven't been listening to that much jazz of late, actually. Do you know what? I found myself gravitating towards the meaningless pap of pop music.
There's nothing, it's very easy to be sniffy about that stuff, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with listening to pop music. The idea that we always must listen to the heaviest, most soul-fulfilling music at all times, and that everything else is just sort of to be looked down on is just painful to me.
I just love the idea that the academic agent is sitting somewhere having an aneurysm and he doesn't know why. And he's just there's something wrong with the world.
Remember that today people look back at the Beatles and basically tell us all how brilliant it was and how this and how this. Yes, it was pop in its day. In its own day, it was just that. It was pop music. And, so over time, what we have done with the past is that we've filtered out all the rubbish, except, of course, the academic agent who still clings to some of the rubbish, like David Bowie. But mainly we've filtered out the rubbish. And we're left with the good things from the past, and we sort of said, oh well, that's what it was like. No, if you actually listen to some of the, if you listen to what was in the charts somewhere throughout the 1970s or whatever, you will find an enormous amount of dross. But the thing is, it's fun and it's entertaining, and people should not take that out of it. In the end, music is supposed to be fun, and it doesn't mean that everything you might like and you might sort of whip your foot to it doesn't necessarily always mean it has to be some grand masterpiece. At times it can also just be something that's complete throwaway, and in 1 or 2 months' time you never want to hear again.
So you're telling me that I shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that I've enjoyed Justin Timberlake's sexy back
not at all. The course of the series. Not at all. I mean, inwardly I'm cringing while saying this.
I'm just picking the cringiest song I can think of and just trying to make you justify it to me.
Well, no, I mean, you have to understand that pop music is fun, and it is supposed to be light-hearted. And, in a way, the Stockaken and Watermans, I think, kind of spoilt a lot of stuff by turning everything into a product. But effectively, they said, look, it's a light-hearted product. I should be so lucky. You listen to it a few times, sooner or later you're sick of it, and then you throw it away and you listen to something else. In a way, their attitude was a little bit too mercenary, I find. But I do completely appreciate the sort of the sentiment behind it. If you don't have pop, you get rid of quite a few serious artists whose main income was actually pop, even though nowadays they're remembered for having, done some more memorable numbers, if you know what I mean.
Are you talking about Aqua and Barbie Girl again?
Precisely, yes, of course.
A mixture of that. What else have we got? Like the Venga Bus.
I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world, isn't it?
I tell you what, you be Barbie and I'll be Cam, and we'll do our own version and release it to critical acclaim. We can't do.
No, but I just mean, folks, don't always be too sniffy about it. Everything that comes out is, in a way, popular and
I'm just
and
hemorrhaging
populist.
viewers. I'm just like,
and it's not just not everything has to be some blues or soul masterpiece or whatever. It can just once in a while also just be Lady Gaga or whatever. Just sometimes relax and let go and don't be sniffy about things.
oh, I try not to take my music too seriously, as it were. Although I tried to listen to Jimi Hendrix, and it's not for me. Let's put it that way.
It depends. I think some of the stuff is inspired. There's no doubt. But then there is also a lot of dross. And what happens with these things is that anything the man ever touched is then retrospectively regarded as a complete masterpiece, when in fact most of us kind of wince and go, he's losing it a bit here. Whereas at other times, yes, some of the other stuff, you just have to say, well, yeah, that was him, and he clearly made something special of it. I think there is a great deal of snobbery when it comes to music. And
as is being proven by some of the chat now, in response to me saying what I do and don't like in music. And it's just like, I'm happy to not like a genre. I can appreciate technical skill in a lot of heavy metal, even if I don't enjoy it.
I'm just trying to sort of think of something to really send them. What was that Italian girl called? Was it Sabrina? Yes, that will have them. Was it Boys, Boys, Boys? That's the one for people
There's
to research.
Nothing beats Nicki Minaj and Bees in the Trap, which is.
Yes, I think Sabrina might have been the 1980s cheap Italian version of Nicki Minaj, if you know what I mean.
Oh, for goodness sake. Nicki Minaj, who is now more chemical than vegetable.
But no, I mean, I really don't, I really don't mind pop music and whatever. It's just, what I despair with, what makes me despair when it comes to music is think of the 20th century and think of all the new forms of music that came in. From sort of early jazz, early blues music. We had gospel, then we had soul music, then we had rock and roll, and it just it developed ever and ever further. But then we got in effectively somewhere in the late 80s, we got to rap music / hip hop, and we've never left. And nowadays,
R&B, Britisher, R&B.
Everything, well, that's just it. It isn't R&B. It's about as far removed from rhythm and blues as you could possibly get.
Telling me that what's his name? What's the guy who just ends up on everything? That like for some bizarre reason, like he has a really synthesized voice, and he ends up on every single song doing like some really terrible. But Sean Paul, is it or no? I don't know.
You're asking the wrong person.
Yeah, I'm asking the wrong person.
But what I find sort of remarkable is that, at first, sort of in the 80s, we kind of had rap when it still called itself rap, if you know what I mean. And then eventually people, the producers cottoned on to the fact that it actually is rather boring. And then effectively they started building in a refrain sung by a woman who could handle herself, if you know what I mean. So somebody who actually could sing would put in something a little melodic, and then the rapper would kind of ruin the intersections, if you know what I mean, and then it would go back to the melody. And this has been sort of ever and ever more sophisticated as time goes on, but we haven't really moved on from that model. And the thing is that the entire music industry seems largely stuck. So no new forms of music have really emerged. And please spare me that some, garage this and whatever that's come out at trying to claim that this is some great novelty in techno or whatever. It's nothing much new that is worthy of a style. If you go back to the old-fashioned record shop, where you had a soul section, you had a rock section, you had, there is nothing that would warrant a new section in a record shop these days that has come out in the last 20 years.
So,
and that's one of the real shames, that innovation has just disappeared in music.
I don't know. I think it's moved in a lot of places, but it's also that I like that AA, as much as he claims to hate this show, listens to this typically at a lunchtime, and he'll listen to this tomorrow because I know he will
choke.
And just imagining him there with the second biscuit on its way to his mouth, the tea shaking in his hand.
Second biscuit, the 12th biscuit,
and that sort of things. And you just get, oh, for goodness sake. I tell you, I recommend once, if you want to have an idea of someone who's truly brutal, like the AA of music, I would go and I would listen to A Dose of Buckley, who's this, he was a Canadian radio presenter who got sick to death of, first of all, the Canadian music boards forcing him to constantly pump Canadian artists like to the tune of like 30 or 40% of their programming has to be Canadian artists. And so he was sick of that because there's not that many of them, and they ended up doing the same songs over and over again. And he got sick to death of typical pop music, and now he basically makes some hate videos about like the worst songs in music at the moment and how he feels about certain topics, everything from incels to the gender pay gap in sports, But no, he's a good laugh, if you don't mind, in small doses, as he is a dose of Buckley, because it's pure salt.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because of course in France, I don't know if they still have, but I know that they had it in the past. I very much doubt they will have got rid of it. That they had precisely that radio programs had to feature a certain percentage of French music, and when you get these kind of strange restrictions, it of course means that they then have to have a supply of French music.
They still do, according to the chat.
But you then get these sort of truly bizarre things, like, the French rap artiste, who is totally ghetto, and you just go, hang on a moment, aren't you just someone pretending to be American but in French?
The only good French artist that I know is actually Belgian, and he's Stromae, and he actually has a couple of songs which I can enjoy listening to. But,
was it Johnny Holiday? Was he Belgian, or am I mistaking things here?
You're asking the wrong person, man. I mean, I have no idea. I think
he was.
Daft Punk was good. Yeah,
he was an absolute sort of god, wasn't he? In on the continent. I'm desperately looking up whether he was. No, I think no, that he was French, apparently. It must be some other chap I'm thinking of then. That there was some sort of continental pretend rock god who it's a strange thing, when it comes to the continent. That in one way it's easy to kind of dismiss them and sort of say, well, it's all a bit of a sort of pretense at trying to maintain music in one's own language. At the same time, there are actually talented folk over there who sometimes don't get a fair shake of the stick simply because they're not singing in English. So, you know, there is talent of which the sort of the English-speaking world has, you know, never heard, simply because these are people who, you know, they've obviously come up with Italian or French or something like that. And I mean, how good would you be at suddenly singing in German if you would have to? Do you
No, I
understand what I
know.
mean?
Yeah.
So it doesn't come natural. They can't be brought to kind of function in the Anglosphere where all the music industry is. So they basically stick to a much smaller little market, which you know, which they cater for in their own language. And in some cases, one is quite surprised at how good some of them are. But then at the same time, yes, there is also a huge amount of just, I mean, brain scramblingly bad stuff. I mean, I would challenge anybody to listen to Heino. Heino.
There was
The German in the Dark Shades. And folks, this is perhaps the best-selling artists of the last 50 years in Germany.
that's alongside David Hasselhoff.
Well, he beat. Trust me, he beat David Hasselhoff. And you listen to that guy, you just go, this can't be true. This, you know, it's almost so stereotypical that you sort of think this is some kind of joke, but it isn't.
Well, Germany is kind of a joke, isn't it? I'm joking, but I remember listening to the intro song to the 1996, I think it was 96, Berserk run, which, if people know, is a famous manga. But anyway, they did this anime run, and they had this song at the beginning, and it was sung by, I think it was Korean artists. And they have absolutely no idea what they're saying, but they sang English words because they sound nice together.
Yep.
So you get a sentence which by itself, the sentence makes sense. So they'll say something like, put your glasses on. But the next sentence will make absolutely no sense, but it's also with this heavy Korean accent. So it's grasses on.
Yeah,
and it started
put
like this whole put your glasses on.
Yes.
Yeah, it's such a meme with that sort of thing. It was hilarious. Now we have some comments.
Put your glasses on. The wind is shining. Yes, and you go, sorry, what?
People were putting their choices for their favorite non-English but English-speaking foreign bands in the chat. So we got things like Gojira, which is apparently a metal band. Two Unlimited were a Dutch band. Do you remember Two Unlimited, Britisher?
No, this doesn't ring a bell.
Two Unlimited, break it.
No, sorry, that just doesn't. But what happened is if it's break it, then they're just folks who are singing in English again.
Of course they were, yeah.
And that's what I mean. It's there are people over there.
Venga Boys.
I'm just trying to think. Eros Ramazzotti. So that's an Italian singer who is. He started out as a kind of heartthrob, if you know what I mean. So, you know, he started out when he was about 20 years old and all the girls had posters of him in their bedroom, that kind of thing. At that point, nobody demands anything of you, if you know what I mean. You just have to turn up in tight pants and they'll scream their heads off. But as things went on, the man clearly, you know, developed some talent. He really can sing. But he's clearly an Italian. There is no way you can kind of try and make him sing sensibly in English. It would simply not translate. It would sound like a pizza advert, if you know what I mean. So I think he also nowadays sings in Spanish, so he's expanded his market that way. But as such, yes, it's the English-speaking world is completely closed off to him. I think he's worked together with some serious artists, you know, Tina Turner and the likes. So there seems to be kind of outside recognition that yes, this man is a talent, but the English-speaking world as such has never heard of him. And in that respect, yes, I think there are some folks over there on the continent who actually can do their stuff. And you know, this can be in any genre, be it heavy metal or whatever. But if they can't break out, so if they're not like the Scorpions who can handle, you know, they could handle themselves in English.
Hmm.
So they're a German band and they can have world hits that way. If they stick to German, they simply will not travel beyond the German-speaking world.
Hmm.
And that is kind of the boundary, because the global market is English. And quite a few of them remain stuck because they will try and sing in English, but it will just sound like a joke.
I mean, there's a couple of German artists that I enjoy in German, like which actually sing in German.
Now, is this where you're trying to tell us that secretly you're totally into Wagner?
Although in that kind of more classical romantic sphere, I've been listening to a lot of Russian classical music, but I'm thinking of let me see what it's called.
As long as it's not
I'm thinking
horror,
of Die Totenhosen.
as long as it's not that absolute horror story that Shinobi Yaka listens to.
What does he listen to? I don't think I've.
Oh, he's once in a while he's posted it on Twitter, and yeah, it's I have responded sometimes when he's put something up on Twitter, and I've just gone, you know, I've just reacted saying, "You worry me," because some of the, how do we say, some of the lyrics get rather dark, you know. When you've got some kind of thrash metal band and you've got the guy at the front, or you know, I don't know the difference between thrash metal and death metal and whatever, but it's in that sphere, if you know what I mean. And then you've got the singer in this kind of ghoulish voice telling us how he wants to hurt us.
Oh dear.
You know?
I think in terms of like in particular German music, as Staff Sergeant Sniper points out, like the tone of their voice and the language lends itself to kind of rock and metal a bit more. So you get Rammstein, for instance, which seems to do quite well.
I think that's the band I'm talking about. I think it might be Rammstein.
Yes.
Yeah.
And similarly, some of the other nations. I mean, you got things like Atirisas and stuff like that, which do quite well.
Here is something. Given you mentioned the languages, that there was something very funny, of course, in the past, because these days in Eurovision, everybody just sings mainly in English. I mean, you know, there are the odd band.
Eurovision has an awful lot to answer for.
Yes, it does. But there was one comedic gem of Eurovision of old that you have to remember. At the time, you know, one insisted they had to sing, they had to sing in their own home language. So you can imagine there were certain limitations because certain languages lend themselves to music and others just do not.
I agree.
Particularly if you're trying to do pop music. So, I mean, the English and the Irish always arrived with a massive advantage. This is, you know, whenever people sort of ask you, oh, why did the Irish win Eurovision so many times? And they'll say, oh, well, we didn't have any wars with anybody else. That's why people are okay voting for us. Yes, that's one of the reasons. The other reason is you could sing in English. Whereas you have to imagine, you know, that sort of the Turks had to come and sing in Turkish. And yeah, it just doesn't work. I'm sorry. And the Germans had, of course, they had the disadvantage. They had the disadvantage that, yes, they had to sing in German. And it always sounds as if they're about to announce that they're announcing that they're about to invade Poland, you know. And the Scandinavians, I mean, you know, I think even ABBA, I think they arrived and they sung, if I'm not mistaken, they sung it in Swedish for the competition. And then you know how the victor gets to perform it again at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was then performed in English. So, you know, okay, now we can do it properly. So now we'll do it in English for the international market. This is what we want you to buy, if you know what I mean. But for the competition, they had to do it in their own language. And, you know, so basically the French, the English, the Italians to an extent, the Spaniards, they had a huge advantage over the absolutely horrendous, awkward languages of some other countries. And if I remember, the Swiss were always regarded as the golden nation because they could choose from about 3 different languages which one they wanted to sing.
Which one shall we do this time? Oh, who choose? I tell you what, I will run through the last few super chats because we are coming towards the end of our time. But the Harry Channel says rap is not completely useless. They should play "Move, Bitch, Get Out the Way" by Ludacris outside number 10.
I'm
S&G
sure if you've got an infestation of rats in the sewers or something like that, and you stick down, you stick some kind of boombox down playing rap for an hour or two, yeah, it would have its uses in that regard. Yes,
we've got enough rats in Parliament at the moment, so
there is that. Yes.
S&GB has sent a super chat entirely in emoji for £10. Thank you very much, and says smiley face, thumbs up, beer. So yes, that would definitely buy me a pint. And Dylan at 98 has donated €2. Thank you very much, and says thoughts on Joseph McCarthy and what he did.
Oh, Jesus Christ. This is the usual thing of basically, oh, it wasn't really McCarthy, it was actually the Democrats. This is the same sort of revisionism we constantly get with, oh, the Nazis were all leftists. I'm sorry, it's just, yeah. For once, just try and accept the narrative as it is established without constantly trying to make out that your side is free of sin, because that is the only thing you are doing when trying to say, oh, well, McCarthy didn't do anything, which of course is why he acquired a reputation, isn't it? Because he didn't do anything at all. So yeah.
I don't know enough about American historical politics to comment on that one, I'm afraid. But I could do some reading. I'd certainly approach my friend McCarthy's list and ask him about it.
One of the problems you always face, and this includes people like McCarthy's list, is then you always get quoted what somebody said on page 324 of their book, and you just go, I've no interest in reading this. It's upon you to convince me to drop the established narrative and not me to convince myself. And
don't be too depressed, British.
Well, no, I there is something about this endless attempt at revising history to fit one's own agenda. And you've just got the feeling, well, yeah, sometimes certain things need looking at with a fresh pair of eyes and so on. I understand that, but dare I mention the Romans? So everybody take a swig.
It only took 2 hours and 10 minutes.
The amount of revisionist rubbish that one gets in that sphere is unbelievable, and then sooner or later it all gets dropped. But it's this kind of Blairite, we all know it's wrong, but the famous Blair thing, we all know that he was dodgy when it came to the Iraq war, but we can't prove it. So he's okay. Yeah, but we all know, and the history books will reflect that. And when it comes to this thing, they dream up some new theory, which is kind of the historical equivalent of string theory, if you know what I mean. Some elaborate this, that, and whatever. And they kind of sell 2 or 3 books on the back of, you can't prove that it wasn't so. And then sooner or later it fades away again, and the consensus reestablishes itself. And we basically settle back in, yeah, I'm sorry, but this is what Roman history was. And then we move on again. And yeah, I'm sorry, but these days, when it comes to more modern history, we have got certain political agendas pushing very strong to kind of, how should we say, clear out their cupboards of any skeletons no, only the other side ever did any wrong. And the simple truth is, it's all nonsense. Just accept that this is not a question of who is free of sin. It's simply a question of how do we address the problems we're facing now. So, what is the point exactly of trying to revise what happened 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, other than for strategic purposes, other than for having an agenda and trying to claim that only the other side ever did wrong? Simply try and apply yourself to what is happening now and stop this revising nonsense.
And there we go, Richard. Thank you for that, the moralizing at the end there. But people are saying that I should sing "Too Unlimited" on the way
Kumbaya.
out.
Yes.
I'm neither inebriated enough nor flushed with super chats to deliver such an undertaking.
There is the appeal to mammon.
There's no appeal. Like, anyway,
give him enough money and he will change his avatar.
Oh,
give him enough money and he will sing some.
No, I've got to eat. I've got to eat, man. I've got to eat. But and I didn't specify an amount this time. People know I'm joking. But I will take us out with the lines.
Everybody wants you to take us out very quickly so they can all go and research. So they can all go and research Sabrina's boys on YouTube.
I will take us out with the words of Tom Lehrer saying, "When the air becomes Uranus and we will all go simultaneous, yes, we will all go together when we go." Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and good night. Take care now.